Paragraph structure is a really, really, really important part of writing. As we read, we have to chunk information because text is hard to translate in our brains. It feels easy, but it's definitely hard. And especially as you get into academics, it becomes more and more abstract. And so it becomes even harder to comprehend. And so we chunk our information in our text and our arguments into these paragraphs so that we can have the time for our brains to translate it and understand what people are trying to communicate to us. Paragraph structure, once you get it, you get it. And it takes a little while, but then it's like riding a bike. You can try all sorts of different things and it becomes habitual, and you won't even have to think about the elements of it the better you get at it. And you'll be able to combine the elements in different ways and experiment with sentence structure and syntax and stuff. And many of you already have this under your belt. But if you don't, or if you need a recap, this is a good one. So the Writing Center at UCD provides an acronym for developing your paragraphs. And that acronym is MEAL, M-E-A-L. M stands for main idea, E stands for evidence, A stands for analysis, and L stands for link. It's a really good acronym and it works. And you can, there's another acronym that I have used as well and that you might be familiar with if you've been in IB programs, but it's P, P-E-E, and it's point, evidence, explanation. This is often used in science writing specifically, and I like it because it makes high schoolers giggle when you say you need to pee more. You could extend it a little like the Writing Center does, and you could make it into PEAL, P-E-E-L, and that would be point, evidence, explanation, link. And using P or MEAL is pretty much the same thing. They're just different terms. And so you do whichever one suits you best, okay? But for either one, you start with your main idea or your point. And so let's say I'm writing about Skippy John Jones. If you are not familiar with him, he is a Siamese cat who thinks he's a Chihuahua or pretends to be a Chihuahua and goes on adventures in his closet with his imagination. He's great. He's a hilarious book. But let's say that my main point is that Skippy John Jones allows young readers to be exposed to multiple languages very easily because the books are written in English, but they use Spanish vocabulary a lot. Okay, so that's my main idea. That's my point. Skippy John Jones is an example of a book that provides readers with vocabulary from a different language. Okay, so you know my whole paragraph's going to be about this little Siamese cat and his exposure to Spanish. Okay, then you have to bring in evidence. Now, evidence, it's the same in both acronyms because it's so important. If you're going to make a point, you got to back it up. And evidence can take many different forms. It could be actual data. It could be quotations from sources or from actual people if you're doing something journalistic. It could be an anecdote from your own personal life. It can take so many different forms, but it is backing up your main point and your main idea. So let's take Skippy John Jones, and one of my pieces of evidence might be right here, how Skippy John is using words and phrases like porque. Okay, so that is my evidence, and I'm going to back it up. But if I just say, for instance, Skippy John Jones uses phrases like porque constantly without explanation. If I leave it there, my reader's going to want more because it's not enough. And so this is where you have to analyze or explain. And so this is where you come into it. This is where you have to use your skills to really explain why that evidence supports your main idea or your point. So I could say something like, porque is a very common Spanish phrase that asks why, and the fact that Schachner, I think that's her name, Schachner, the author, doesn't explain porque allows readers to engage with the book by figuring out what that phrase might mean. Okay? Now, in your paragraph, you could repeat that evidence analysis multiple times. And in a good academic article, you probably will. So it ends up being MEA, okay, or PEE, because you sometimes need a lot of evidence to make your point. But with shorter paragraphs, you can also just do one bit of evidence, especially if you're kind of massaging the point in different ways. But remember that anytime you provide evidence, you need to explain it or analyze it so that the reader understands why you chose it and how it relates to your main idea. And then finally, that L is a link. You need to either link this idea back to your thesis, or you need to link the idea to your next paragraph. And in many cases, you're going to do both. This link can be very subtle. It can be some of the same vocabulary you used in your thesis, or some of the same vocabulary you will use in the next paragraph. It can be really obvious too, especially if you're linking to that next paragraph. You could say something like, you will see more of this as we discuss other books that use different languages in them. And then move to the next paragraph, and you know that we're going to be talking about another book that does this. So meal or peel, whichever you prefer, these are really good acronyms to just keep in the back of your mind as you're writing your paragraphs. And if a paragraph fails, go through it and see if you've got all those elements, especially that kind of pairing of evidence with analysis or evidence with explanation. Are you constantly explaining your evidence, and are you constantly linking everything back to your thesis or to your main idea and also to the next paragraph that's coming afterward?